Hurst. We're starting a new series called Daring Greatly. And thank you, band. That was just great. You really brought it together. Thank you. So we're starting this new series called Daring Greatly, and I'm looking at the woman singing Shine up on this stage. And I would say 4 or 5 years ago, Sue would not have done that for us in any way. She may have done it in a little karaoke studio somewhere, but not here. But Sue has expanded her heart and embraced her music. So we are growing greatly. Just, yeah. That's how we do it here. You know, we learn from one another. We get inspired, and we do help each other, don't we? So let me tell you about this new series called Daring Greatly. It's based on this book by a woman named Brene Brown. She has her bachelor's, her master's, and her PhD in social work, and she's a researcher. And so she began to research extreme vulnerability, and she found that that was really her niche. She gathered to her lots of life stories, and she found that people fell in two categories. One were people who did not thrive, and they stayed in their life story, and they felt depressed because of it. And there were others who seemed to grow through it and who seemed to put it in context, and they began to thrive. They demonstrated a sense of connectivity to others, and the one key ingredient that Brene found was that these people who thrived were the ones who felt worthy and felt a sense of belonging to themselves, to others, and in groups, and on the planet itself. So then she went a little bit further and she said, well, what do these people who are worthy, feeling worthy, have in common? And she found that there were 4 different key characteristics, and it's true then that for all of us who have life challenges, and we all do, that these are the things that we will demonstrate when we come from a place of living wholeheartedly and with a sense of purpose. We will have courage, comes from the Latin word cur, heart. These are the people, when they told their story, still felt like they had a sense of worthiness about themselves, and they were able to love others. Compassion, they could care about themselves and also care about others. Connection, neurobiologically, we need to connect. It's who we are in our DNA. And these were people who were able to continue to connect, no matter what life issue they had encountered. And then they were also able to experience a certain amount or degree of vulnerability to be able to tell their life story and not be ashamed, not feeling that they had to be more than who they are, not feeling that they weren't good enough or this enough or that enough. They simply were here, simply showing up and being present. And so what we want to do in this series for this month and for October, we want to come from a place of wholeheartedness. You and I want to examine ourselves, how we can love one another deeper with our whole hearts, and how we can be grateful for every day, and how we can believe in ourselves that we truly are good enough. So we're going to start with a video, and then Richard will come forward.
Often the first question I get is, tell me about the title Daring Greatly. I mean, where does that come from? It sounds great, but what is it, and what does it have to do with vulnerability? And for me, I'm so passionate about the title because truthfully, the whole concept and the whole idea behind Daring Greatly, I feel like really changed my life. I was in an incredibly difficult place. I was trying to show up in my work and put myself out there, and I was writing a lot and talking a lot about my research. And I felt like the more I did that, the more exposed I felt and the more afraid I felt, and the more I was constantly ducking and weaving criticism. And I came across this quote by Theodore Roosevelt. It's not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who's actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and blood and sweat, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes up short again and again, who at best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly. I know that there's a myth that vulnerability is weakness, but it's not. To show up, to let ourselves be seen, to try, to put ourselves out there when we're not sure if we're going to succeed, that's vulnerability, and that's daring greatly. And for me, this book is about what it takes to bust through the fear of not being enough, of not being perfect enough, of not being bulletproof enough, the fear of failing. You know, I used to have the question that used to guide my life is, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? And since I wrote Daring Greatly, and since I came across this quote, my new question is, what's worth doing even if I fail? So thank you for your time. I hope you enjoy the book, and here's to Daring Greatly. I think we could use some more of it.
How many people know about her? Oh my goodness gracious, yeah. As Vicki said, she's a social worker and a researcher, and she is an individual who, through her research, found a better way to live. It happens to so many of us, you know. Through our research, through our work, through our struggles, through our living life fully, we step into an arena, as Theodore Roosevelt said. An arena where we are able to dare greatly, an arena where we are able to live life wholeheartedly. And during the next few minutes, what I want to do is just kind of share with you what to expect over the next few weeks. We're going to actually do this series for 8 weeks, okay? That's the longest series we've done. But we think that the material, we think the information is so valuable that it will literally transform your life. And we all had our transformations, but even further, even more, opening us up to be that light, to be the channels where we can create a life that works for us, that challenges us, and allows us to be the light, if you would, in other people's lives. So I want to challenge you to be in the arena, but also I want to challenge you to overcome fear of failure. We hear a lot about that. And fear of success. We don't hear as much about that. But they both are equally fears that get in our way of living life and being daring with our lives. Now, when I talk about daring greatly, I'm not talking about taking unnecessary risk, ridiculous risk. I'm not talking about, throwing all your money in the stock market on a stock that a friend told you about because it's a good idea, and that's daring greatly. I'm really talking about spiritually living life so that you can truly open yourself up and find the peace and find the joy and find the happiness that you are worthy of, that you deserve, and that truly is the innate value of who and what you are. So over the next 3 weeks, or 8 weeks, I kind of throw a challenge to you. And this challenge is for you to say to yourself, I will either be at Unity of Richmond during all of this series and or watch, this is not an advertisement, this is for you, and watch live streaming of the series if I can't be here, or to watch it on YouTube if I can't be here. It's available to all three, okay? If you don't do YouTube, it'll be on the iPad or iPod, also for audio. And I want you to do this because I really do believe that what we're looking at goes so deep and transforms one's life at a way in which we might think we're already there, and then we find out, oh, we got further to go. There's more opportunity. I didn't know that. I'm a pretty good person. I like me. I love me. But still, more than likely, if you're like me, you got a few hang-ups. Now, what we want to do is examine some of those hang-ups under the research that Brene did. And as we examine ourselves, we can ask ourselves certain questions during these weeks. And the questions are, what thoughts about myself hold me back from daring greatly? What holds me back? How can I dare myself to live life wholeheartedly? Being out there, being in the arena. And how in the world do I create what she's talking about, a wholehearted life? Some of you are doing that already. Most of you probably are. And you're working on that and you're open to it. But some may still be in those areas in their lives where being wholehearted is a challenge. Because of what we've been taught, because of what we experience, because of what we call failures that maybe took place in our lives. And as we examine ourselves, we don't see the good. And as we look at ourselves, we're going to ask some key and scary questions. Do I experience life as not enough or a life of plenty? For example, when you get up in the morning, do you say, I didn't get enough sleep? Now, I'm not talking about once every 3 months. I'm talking about, consistently. I just didn't get enough sleep. Do you say, I don't have enough time to get everything done that I want to get done? And you don't. It's okay. But do you say that to yourself and expect something different? Do you hear yourself saying these things? I'm never good enough. I'm never thin enough. I'm never loved enough. Never perfect enough. Never powerful enough. Never strong enough. Never brave enough. Never safe enough. Or never have enough. Now maybe you don't say it quite that loudly to yourself, but as we examine ourselves, we can take a look at that and say, in what parts of my life do I feel that way? Because probably there are parts of our lives, for most of us, that we feel that way. That we have this perception that we are not enough. And then when we don't feel like we're enough, you see, what we do is we start to create shame. And as we create the shame, as we feel the shame, what happens is we start to hide ourselves from one another. We're not willing to be vulnerable. Shame is a reaction to a number of things. One, I am supposed to be perfect. Now, those who know me well know I'm not a perfectionist. I wasn't brought up with that. It wasn't part of my psyche, being a perfectionist. But that doesn't mean that you can't strive for excellence. But sometimes perfectionism can get in the way of allowing ourselves to be vulnerable. And as we look at this idea of shame, we understand that it is a full body experience. That when I feel shame, I want to hide myself. When I feel shame, I don't want to connect with anybody. When I feel shame, I think something's wrong with me. When truly there's nothing wrong with any of us, except our perception sometimes of who we are. And so as we step out of the shame into the light, we become more vulnerable. And that is scary. So one of the things we're going to talk about also is the myths of vulnerability. You and I, over the years, have created armor, if you would, to protect ourselves from being vulnerable, to protect ourselves from being hurt. Some people go through a marriage and it doesn't work. And they just say, well, I'll never get married again. Because it doesn't work. And they live in a great deal of pain. And they live in some shame. When I went through my divorce, I felt some shame. And the reason I felt the shame is because family members, and they loved me, but they misunderstood. You see, I was the first one in my family to get a divorce. And so I felt some shame in that. And it was the shame that kept me from connecting with the people I loved most. And so through this power of shame, I can disconnect. It also is this armor of vulnerability that I learned to have. And my greatest My greatest piece of armor was defensiveness. I didn't even know what that was until I was about 30 years old. I'm a slow learner. They didn't talk about defensiveness and ego when I was in high school. But when I got older, I started to understand what it was. And I can be the most defensive person you've ever met and even fool you at it at times. But if you really know me and get to know me, every once in a while it's going to sneak out, even though my intention is for it not to control me. So I can be defensive. As I started to admit that and not be ashamed of it and understand it was keeping me from being more of what I could be, I started to release the defensiveness. I started to set an intention to be different, to show up differently, to be a light, not darkness. To be connected, not disconnected. And that's what vulnerability in her studies can do for you. It teaches you when you are vulnerable. And I know we're taught not to be that way. But when we are vulnerable, we are at our best. Renee, said that about 8 years or 6 years into her research that she had literally a breakdown. Because what she was researching and what she was finding out about the way to live life was different than the way she was living life. And that was a clash. And she said it created a breakdown. But what she learned was it did not create a breakdown, and Vicki uses these words, it creates a breakthrough. And it was a breakthrough to her spiritual understanding of herself. What a breakthrough. What a powerful thing. And here's a woman who had spent 10 years of her life doing tremendous research on all the things you should be in order to live a life of happiness and peace and love. And so we have this armor of vulnerability, and we'll be looking at some of those myths during these next few weeks. Another thing we'll be looking at is parenting without shame and blame. You saw it this morning. You heard it this morning. We see our children as love. They are love. If they are love, they're loving. If we see them as love, we see them as loving. Mischievous at times, a challenge at times, but they truly are love. And the more we treat them like that, the more we see them like that, the more of the issues of the future that will be reversed and eliminated. Because they'll grow up different. They'll see the world different. They'll be willing to be vulnerable. They'll be willing to have some shame, admit the shame, and get through the shame. And most of all, they'll be connected. Because that's the next thing that happens as we look at this idea of connection. But before I still want to talk to children for a second. One of the things that happened this morning as I was getting coffee is I was talking to Sue. And she was calming me down from being nervous, and I was calming her down from being nervous as we had our coffee, which makes you nervous. But anyway, Sue shared, I said, what's your week like? She said, I had a great week. And those of us who are grandparents know what that means. That means I had time with my grandchild. Okay? And she did. And she said, it's amazing. Out of the mouths of babes, as we've heard, comes the most wonderful things. And she and her grandson were busy. They were in Petersburg. They were here and there and all over the place, having a great time. And this 4-year-old looks at his grandmother and says, Grandma, there's a lot to do in this world, isn't there? Oh, yeah. And all he saw was just what I would call the greater Richmond metropolitan, Petersburg metropolitan area. But he knew innately there's more to do. And there's things to be done. And as we become adults, we have to take on the responsibility. And I really mean this. We have to take on the responsibility of being vulnerable, of daring greatly, of getting in the arena of life. Because that's where we can make a difference. And where we do that, again, is our ability to connect. And in the Course in Miracles this morning, we were talking about the idea of connection. The Course in Miracles says that the reason we're here is for relationships, to heal relationships and to heal ourselves. Some were talking about the fact that when we look at others in a certain way, we really are looking at ourselves in the mirror. Now, I don't mean when we look at somebody and say, boy, they sure are love. I'm talking about when we look at somebody and say, what's wrong with them? What's their problem? It's a reflection of what we are thinking. And so that is a disconnect if we're not careful. But we connect when we see through the stuff, through the actions, and we see the truth that they are children of God, that they are created in the image of God, that they are truly loved. And they want the same thing that you and I want, which is to be loved in an appropriate manner. Not to act out so we get love, but to act into the world so that we feel the love of each and every person, including ourselves. That's when we're in balance. That's when we can make a difference in the world. So we'll be talking about this whole thing of connection and relationships. Vicki mentioned that as Renee did her work, she started to look up the word courage because she wanted to know the difference between being brave and being courage. And again, the word C-O-U-R, cor, comes from Latin. I had a lot of Latin, and I didn't know that. But it comes from Latin, and it means heart. Courage is the whole heart. What wholehearted people have is the courage to live from the heart. And when we live from the heart and think from the heart and come from the heart, we are the light. We're not just brave, we are authentic. We are that love. We are that friend. We are that person who can look at what we call an enemy and not see an enemy, but see someone who needs love. We can step up to the plate. Time and time and time again. Those who played baseball or softball know that every time you got to the plate, you didn't hit a home run. Matter of fact, we, quote unquote, failed more than we were able to succeed. I mean, a 400 batting average is phenomenal in baseball. That means this fella got out 60% of the time, right? Now, some people in the world call that failure. I would guess that what they were doing is learning how to hit the ball better because of the times they struck out, to anticipate what that pitcher was going to do and how that ball was going to come at them. It's called experience in life. What is life throwing at us? And how do we get up to the batting or in the batting stance? How are we willing to take the risk of even striking out? And as Renee said, what's worth striking out for is important. Because every time I strike out, I get a chance to hit a home run. And it happens every once in a while. And it makes things feel beautiful and bright. So during the next few weeks, I encourage you, I challenge you to be courageous. I dare you, as the word says, to be courageous. Not to be worried about being imperfect. Not to worry about not being compassionate, because you are naturally. To be authentic, to be vulnerable. To be connected at the heart level. Because what I know from my personal experience, and I've still got a long ways to go, is that when I do that, when I step up to the plate, when I say yes to God, when I say yes to the higher power within me, my divinity, when I say yes to being vulnerable, I feel peace, I feel love, I feel happiness, and I grow even more. And you know, some days, some moments, I think I'm there. But you know I know that I'm not. I'm just on the road, on the journey, like each of you. And as we are on that road, on that journey, on that path, we can continue to transform. As Jesus said, to be born again, and again, and again, and again. They left that out of the gospel. But that's what he was saying, okay? To be born again and again and again and again. That's transformation. That's changing one's mind, changing one's outlook, having a new perception on life, and stepping into that perception as the light of God that you are. That's what we're talking about. That's exciting stuff as far as I'm concerned. If it puts you to sleep, stay home. If it excites you and gives you hope and courage, come here. Be here as we grow together. Wholehearted people live from the heart. They are beacons of life. They live in peace and prosperity and joy. And you know what? The same things that are happening to them or happening to other people who are not wholeheartedly are happening to them. They just know how to live with it and through it. Life isn't unfair. Life is. And when you're in the isness of life, boy, you see the sunshine every day. You see the love in others every day. And you say, I like this. This feels good. I want more of it. So come on and join us. Let's all have more of it. Thank you.